We are live. All right. Well, everyone, I want to welcome our first remote guest speaker, Jesse Gardner, who is joining us from upstate New York tonight. He's going to talk about search engine optimization, search engine marketing, online reputation management. He's been in the field for a long time. He is a terrific guy, and he's been kind enough to be flexible tonight. So let's hear it for, and sound like a lot more people than we have in the room. Let's hear it for Jesse Gardner. So Jesse, tell us a little bit about your background and what you do.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. So just to give you kind of background, I have been designing and developing on the web since, well, officially since 2005. I started my own business, Plastic Mind Design. But before that, I have been messing with computers since my IBM PC Junior in 1984. So I've been working on computers for a while. Started off more as a designer. I had an illegal copy of Photoshop that I learned how to use Photoshop with. And then I met some really great developers and basically said, hey, I'll trade you. If you teach me how to do development work, I'll do design for you. I'll make icons and whatever you need. And so that's kind of how I learned. That's how I got into this industry, really, more than anything else. And I had my own business for a while. And then in 2010, one of my clients, AMC Networks, brought me on full time. One of the things that I did there was a director and helped put together the public facing sites for like The Walking Dead and Mad Men and that sort of thing. So I did that for a couple of years, and then I took a job working full time for Simply Recipes, which is one of the largest food blogs in the world, and did that until about 2 months ago. And now I'm back doing Plastic Mind Design again, and very excited about what the future holds. So that's a little bit about my background.
Hey, terrific. And we can connect with you. You are on Twitter at Plastic Mind.
Yes, I am. I am at Plastic Mind pretty much everywhere, and there's nothing special about that name. I picked it back in 1999, I think it was, because I could get to the top of search results. And so thankfully I have been able to acquire Plastic Mind pretty much everywhere. So Instagram, Snapchat, wherever. So.
All right, terrific. Now you have a little presentation for us tonight, and then we're going to open it up to questions.
Yeah.
So feel free to launch.
To dive right in. Okay. All right. Super formal. I actually had slides, but then I just threw them away because I wasn't happy with. I hadn't finished them, so I figured what I do is just talk a little bit about search engine. What I wanted to do was I wanted to start off with probably the most important question, and that is, do we actually need SEO? If you look at the Google Webmaster Guidelines, one of their primary one of the main things that they say is you should make pages primarily for users, not for search engines. And so there's been this debate ever since I can remember about how important or how legitimate SEO was. And I'll tell you, my philosophy for the longest time was, you make good content, you put it out there, and the search engines find it. And that, and I actually kind of looked down on SEO people because I often saw them as tea leaves, and nobody really knew what the search engines were doing, and so everybody was trying to figure it out, and it was a lot of anecdotal data. There was not a lot of. It was I had this sense that authorship mattered or whatever. And so that was my philosophy. I kind of looked down on the whole SEO field. And then I started working at Simply Recipes, and Simply Recipes is great because it's tons of really, really high quality recipe content. Elise had been writing recipes since 2002, I think it was. So she was one of like the first bloggers, really. And that's actually how I met her, through the blogging software that we both used. And so when I started working with her, I think I kind of evolved to a better understanding of it. I still think that good content is the most important part of SEO. But what I come to realize, that if you don't understand how to get that good content to Google, or to inform Google that you have this fantastic content, and in a way that is optimized specifically for Google, you might, what ends up happening is you really can leave some of that value on the table, and presumably something, a competitor can come along and, and beat you. And so that, I think, has kind of shaped the way that I look at search engine optimization. And I definitely don't have like formal training in this. This is definitely boots on the ground information, stuff that I've learned from 4 years of really trying to figure this out.
Hey, let me ask you, Jesse, does anyone really have formal training? I mean,
well, and that, I think that's one of the things. I think the trouble is, because how Google and other search engines work, because all of that stuff is a black box. I mean, Google has expressed itself, but the nuance of how it actually works is kind of hidden and veiled. So I think there's a lot of people, reading tea leaves, and what's worse is that a lot of people are just saying, we guarantee that we will get you, X position in the Google rankings and stuff like that. And those kind of claims are just not, there's no way that anybody can guarantee that. I mean, there are definitely things that you can do, and I'm going to hopefully cover some of them today and point you towards tools that will help you best optimize your content in a way that Google has clearly said it wants to see your content. But I think sometimes there's this like voodoo magic aspect to it, which I don't really like dwelling in that, because I think there's a lot of things that people argue over that really you can't prove. So what I'd like to do is to kind of demystify and talk a little bit about, from my own experience. I wanted to start, if it's all right, Eric, going through, because I don't know exactly where everybody is at in the class. So I thought what I'd do is begin by giving some just definitions of some terms, common terms that you'll see in SEO, and then talk a little bit about how Google works. I think you mentioned that you probably have covered this, but I'll just kind of give a high-level overview to start with, and then go in a little bit deeper.
Sure, sounds good.
Okay. So to start off, there's a couple of terms that I think are really important, and sometimes people don't have a good grasp of them. Page view. That's when somebody loads up a URL that represents a complete page on your site. That gets pulled in as a page view. And now that's not the same thing as a visit, because a visit is a set of page views that's followed by 30 minutes of inactivity. So you can have multiple page views per visit. And that visit is, if you bring up a page on plasticmind.com, right? You go to my homepage and then you click on the first blog post that you see. Now there are 2 page views that are associated with that visit. Now you get up and you go and you make yourself a sandwich, you're gone for 30 minutes and you come back. Because you were gone, Google says, okay, now that was a visit. Now, if you happen to come to my site again later on that day, you will now have 2 visits on that day, okay? So there's page views, there's visits, there's the concept of a unique visitor, and that's if you are visiting from a specific IP address, you're gonna be hitting my page, that IP address, you are a unique visitor coming in. A returning visitor is somebody who has visited before and come back, and it's generally tracked via IP. Sometimes Google uses cookies as well, but generally speaking, it's IP address. A hit is something that's a little bit different than page view and visit, because a hit is any file or resource that's loaded from your server by a human or a bot. So for example, if you click on, if you go to plasticmind.com, that's a page view, but there are going to be multiple hits there because you're going to be hitting my main profile picture, and then that image is going to be a hit. And then the icon sprites, like for my little social widgets, those are going to be considered a hit. So there's all these kind of hits that are happening per page. Another one that we'll talk about in a little bit is a bounce rate. And you'll see this if you're ever in Google Analytics. You'll probably see this if you've ever been in, checked out Google Analytics. But the bounce rate basically is the percentage of visits with only one page view. And so if you were to go to plasticmind.com from Google and you were to just bail and hit the back button, or type in yahoo.com or go somewhere else, Google would count that as a bounce. And that's...
Hey, Jesse, it's interesting. We were talking about relevance, and we were talking about authority. Mm-hmm. We weren't talking before the break. We didn't really address these analytics. So you're saying that in addition to the content on the page and behind the page, and the inbound and links and other links, inbound and outbound, Google looks at these analytics as well for your website.
Absolutely, yeah. Right, because one of the things you have to keep in mind, Google knows that if you've clicked on this result and you don't end up staying on that page and you come back to Google, then they'll say, well, that was a that was a failure. And I'm sure there's some time element in there as well, where if you bounce right back, that's going to be a bigger problem than if, say, for instance, you're there for 20 or 30 minutes. So we'll talk about bounce rate because there's a lot of different signals, but bounce rate, I just wanted to kind of put that out there as one of the definitions to talk about, because analytics do play a role here as well. And then the other thing is the visit duration, and that's an important metric as well. The time of, that a user spends, the average amount of time that a user spends per visit. So you were talking before the break about authority and
relevance, the actual content on the page.
Okay, all right. So I was gonna do that. I'll just fly through this because it sounds like you've kind of covered it. So basically, the main way that Google determines relevance is if one web page links to your web page, Google says, okay, that's a vote of confidence, right? You just basically, this website in linking to your site, that's a signal of relevance in some way, shape, or form. If a lot of sites link to your web page, well, Google says, okay, so now there's a lot of relevance there. There's a lot of authority that your site has. And if the sites that linking to you has high relevance and high authority, well, then their vote counts more and it has more weight to it. So if you get linked to from, say, google.com, well, now that's going to shoot you up a lot more than, Super Star Wars Fan 32.com. You know what I mean? So there's going to be a lot more weight that's placed behind that. And if one of those pages links to a lot of other pages, then the value of those links is divided up. So if, say, for instance, on a blog post that I write, and I link to 3 different sites, the value of the authority that I'm passing through, sometimes it's called like link juice, or, the relevance that I'm passing along, the value of that relevance is divided up. So if you have a page that has a lot of links, it actually has less value than a page that only has just a few links. And then the other thing that's important too is if a page links to you with a word that's relevant to what your content is about, that's even better, right? Because that helps Google know that not only are they linking to your site, they're linking to your site for a particular term. So this is one of the things that I think people mix up sometimes. Sometimes what they'll do is you probably have seen it before, where somebody will say, click here for, a great recipe. And they'll highlight click here and they'll link that. But click here has like zero relevance to why you're linking to them. So for instance, if you said, click here for a great brownie recipe, it would make more sense to have that whole thing or brownie recipe be the thing that you're actually sending over, because you are telling Google this thing that I'm linking to is a brownie recipe. So
You're talking about anchor text, right?
Right, right. Oh, and not just anchor text, the actual link itself. And so for images, for instance, the alt text, Google, values that, calculates some of that stuff in there as well. So that's like the high level overview of how Google figures out how to, determine ranking. And I want to talk about that a little bit more specifically because I want to talk about some of the signals, but that's like the main way that Google, it's basically like a popularity contest, right? If you have a lot of inbound links, then that's great for you. But if it seems like you're rigging the system, that can be a bit of a problem. And I'll talk about that as well in just a little bit.
Hey, Jesse, before you get into the details, and we want to hear those details, can you talk just for like 30 seconds about how this actually goes down? You post a site online, and Google sends a crawler or a spider or something over to your website to analyze it. How does that work?
Yeah, so what happens is Google actually, if you ever, you guys might not be server people, but you can actually look in your logs and you can see that there's this Google bot that actually will crawl your site, and it basically will hit your front page, and it will essentially spider its way through all of the links. And actually Google's gotten smarter about this, because now what it does is Google really likes for you to have a sitemap, because I'll share this tool with you a little bit later, but there's the Google Webmaster Console, or the Google Webmaster tool in the Search Console. You can actually tell Google, this is my site, and this is the sitemap for my site. And what the sitemap allows you to do is it allows you to say, this page changes a lot. This page doesn't change that often. And that gives, it's not, Google doesn't have to follow that, but they generally use that as a guideline. And so for instance, like Simply Recipes was constantly updating its site. And so Google was constantly scraping us a lot more than My Plastic Mind design site, which I didn't update too often. And so freshness of content is one of the ways that Google determines, should we come back here tomorrow and scrape? Because obviously that's taking a lot of their server resources to do as well.
Okay, great. Thank you. Oh, we have a question. Yeah.
Manually or automatically?
This with Google is done manually or automatically?
So it happens automatically, but in the Google Webmaster Console, there's actually this really, really useful tool. Let me see if I can bring it up just so I can show it to you.
So as a publisher, we just post our website, and at some point, Google will come and check it out.
Yeah, you hope the Google fairy visits your website, right? So basically, that's true. You can sit around and wait for that to happen. The other thing that is really helpful, let me see if I can bring up my Search Console. So this is my Search Console. It's if you Google Webmaster Tools, you can see google.com Webmaster Tools. This actually shows a lot of great information about my site. But one of the things I wanted to show you is there's this thing called crawl. And what's wonderful, there's a section in here called Fetch as Google. And you can actually type in a URL from your site, or if I just want to do the homepage, you can just say fetch. And it will actually go out and fetch your site using the Google crawler. It'll go out and do that. And then you can click Submit to Index, which is a great way to kind of prime Google to let Google know, hey, we're out here now. This is really, really helpful if you're either launching a new section of your site or launching a new site in general. So this is a really great place. It's also really great to test, and I'll come back to that in just a minute.
Does every big website publisher use the Webmaster Tools from Google? Is that
absolutely? Even small ones do, because it'll show you if there's crawl errors. It will come back. I'm going to talk in a little bit about some issues that you can run into, like signals or problems with bad markup, something like that. Google will actually tell you those. So it'll say here, there's an increase in soft 404s, which basically are it's Google's trying to crawl these WP admin, which are like WordPress URLs. So I should probably not, it's not a big deal, but it's good for me to know that. And then it'll also show you 404s. So here's a URL, Twitster index.xml. That doesn't exist anymore. Google's trying to crawl it, but it's getting a 404. So I may want to either fix that by putting in a redirect or something along those lines. So it just gives you good insight into how Google is viewing your site. And then the sitemaps, as I mentioned, this is where you can come in and you can just say, hey, let's add a sitemap. And if you use WordPress, there are great sitemap plugins out there that you can, there's a Google XML one that will automatically take all of your posts and turn them into a sitemap, and then you can come in here and you can submit it, and it'll tell you if there's any problems. But you can see it's 834 submitted web items on this sitemap, and 374 images that have been submitted. So it's just a lot of good insight into what Google is actually seeing. All right, let me see if I can stop sharing my screen for a moment. There we go. So let me just do a quick rundown how. So basically, Google's got this really crazy algorithm called Hummingbird, and it's made up of all these different parts. And I'm only going to tell you these things just so that you kind of have them in your head, that these are the things that Google is looking at.
And Jesse, that algorithm is updated frequently, and it has a different name each time?
Well, so Hummingbird is the engine. The different parts of the engine are like Panda is one of the, I call them facets. So they're different facets of this particular site algorithm. It's almost like there's a little components, and Panda is one of them. And Panda was focused specifically on getting low quality content out of the index. And I want to come back to talk about quality, because Google has especially now really focusing on quality content, and they're really hammering that home. And what quality content looks like is they define very specifically. So I'll come back to that in just a minute. Pigeon is another one that was focused on local search results. Penguin and Payday were algorithm facets that were put in place to help fight against page spam. So like there were a lot of computer generated content that really was just nothing more than spam. And then also backlink spam. We were having issues where people were linking to Simply Recipes, but with spammers to kind of downgrade our ranking. And so when that rolled out, it actually helped us out a lot. Top Heavy was one where they were trying to promote or trying to demote ad heavy pages. So pages where there was just lots of ads and it was really hard to find the content on the site. That algorithm change was specifically focused on that topic. Okay. There was a mobile friendly rollout that was, and I think that happened, I think it was just this last year. They basically said, if we're going to start caring whether or not your site is mobile friendly, and everybody suddenly got really excited about responsive web design. There were a couple of other ones about promoting freshness and copyright infringement, but so Google is constantly looking at all of these different facets, and they're constantly tweaking these things. A good way to keep up on all of what's happening with with the changes that Google is making, and I would almost make this like required watching, but the Google Webmaster YouTube channel, fantastic resource. Basically, users submit their questions, and they're not dumb questions. They're actually really useful, relevant questions. And somebody from the web search team actually answers it, and usually answers it pretty candidly. Sometimes it's a little, we don't normally, but it's pretty good. So I would actually recommend taking a look at
Okay.
So there are a lot of signals that Google looks at, and there's a lot of argument over which signals Google looks at. As a matter of fact, I'll share. Can I share to the room? It may not make sense to do that, but if you Google, there's a complete list of Google's 200 ranking factors, and just to give you an idea of some of them, there's like the recency or frequency of updates, whether or not you have lots of broken links on your site. Duplicate content is a huge one. If you get caught taking somebody's content, or if other people steal your content, you can actually get penalized. Whether or not your site is HTTPS, whether or not it has an SSL certificate. Google has really, over the last year, started focusing on that.
Just to elaborate on that just for a second, that is demonstrates that your website has some security features. Is that important for an e-commerce website?
Yeah, it's definitely important for e-commerce websites. Absolutely.
For non-e-commerce websites.
Right. So when it first came out, I didn't think it was important because recipes, and we didn't even have user sign in. If you have user sign in, I definitely think it's more important. If you're collecting any user information, like a login or even with comments, sometimes you can run into issues because if people are putting their email addresses in, so you start to get into a gray area. But it's my understanding that Google wants everybody on SSL, and I think they're even doing a. I can't remember if it's Google the one that's putting it on, but there's a site that's promoting, like, offering free site certificates to try to get everybody to switch over. So my concern with it was when you do that, it's not super easy to do, because if you're trying to load a script, say for instance, from a non-secure site, but your site is secure, you get errors and warnings and stuff like that. So it's a challenge, but it's just one of the signals that they said that they specifically are focusing on. Bounce rate was one of them. Local, there's a lot of signals for local searches, the geolocation of the user searching and what kind of local information you're providing. So there's that as well. Rich snippets. I'd like to talk more about rich snippets.
Define that first, because I don't know if anyone, including myself, is really up to speed on that.
Sure. Yeah. So this is really, really important. So rich snippets. If you Google rich snippets, Google has a lot of fantastic documentation about this. But in a nutshell, rich snippets are just a way for you to take specific types of content and mark it up, like to put code in the back end so that when Google receives it, it knows the type of data you're sending it. And I'll give you an example, because one of the rich snippet types is recipe. Recipe is one of their specific types that they recognize. And so what we did on our site, we were able to pass it along a featured image. We could pass along the prep time and the cook time. We were able to pass along ingredients. We could pass along the author name. We could pass along just a few more pieces of information, like review, like how many stars this got and how many people reviewed it. So we pass that information to Google, and there's a lot of different types of these things, but Google specifically, when it sees that information on a recipe website, in the search results page, you get the stars and you get the featured image and you get the time that it takes. And I think calories, like nutritional information, get displayed there because Google said, hey, that's great information for our users. People want to see that. So because that's going to inform their decision as to whether or not they want to click on that particular recipe. So for us as a publisher, suddenly it's like now instead of just, a little text link with like a little blurb beneath it, we now get stars and we get a beautiful image from our site here. And we get, so for us, it was like, this is a no-brainer. We want to implement that. And
that's awesome for recipe sites. Are there rich snippets for other types of content sites?
Yeah. Yep. Absolutely. So there are movies have rich snippets. So sites that have, movies. I think Google is start changing it, and now they're talking more about structured data. I think the thing to clarify is that how they handle the data changes depending on the type of data you're passing along. So for us, the recipe information was getting pulled into the Google search results page. Whereas if you're passing along rich snippet data for local, like a local business, you can specify like telephone number, contact information, address. Well, that kind of stuff is extremely important because then Google says, a local result. And now you're going to be more likely to show up. Certain types of results are more likely to trigger a local result. So what ends up happening is, I know I've worked with a client that has like a swimming pool water delivery. And so we put that information on their site, and suddenly now when somebody searches for, filling a swimming pool, they get a map that pops up, and it shows like on the map a little pin, and it has their location because that was something that was specified in those local rich snippets. And there are a couple of other ones. I think book reviews and other types of reviews can get passed along. And I think they're doing more with that. As a matter of fact, one of the things that they're doing is if you were to bring up, your mobile phone, I don't think they're doing this on desktop, but if you bring up your mobile phone and you were to search, say for like Obama or something like this, something news related, you get they're calling it the carousel. You probably have seen that before. And you can actually just swipe vertically. So you have your results, but now instead you get these big, like really touch-friendly results that you can kind of swipe across with. And what I've learned in working with, working with some of the Google team, that one of the ways that you can get up there is by having rich snippet information. They also like AMP, which I'm not sure if you guys have covered AMP yet.
I don't know what that is.
Okay, so AMP is, it's kind of controversial, but Google is really pushing hard this year with AMP, because what AMP is, if you search on your mobile phone, right, and actually you guys could probably all take your phone out now and do it. Let me do it too, along with you. If you bring up, your phone and you do a search, and let's say you search for some news-related thing. I'm going to type in Obama, see if I get some results. Yeah, so I type in Obama, and on my phone I get these top stories, and you get like Fox News there, and if I swipe over, you can kind of see that I'm getting this really great like kind of carousel experience. And next to some of them, I don't know if you can make it out, but next to some of them on the bottom, there's like a little lightning bolt and it says AMP.
Oh, yeah.
If you were to tap on that, it brings it up, but if you'll notice, you're still on google.com. Because what's happening is you're passing Google a really, really light version of your page with hardly any ads, no scripts. They support very, very little, because what they're trying to do is they're trying to get the web faster, because users want everything faster. And so they're trying to promote that. So what they have been saying is that, having that kind of AMP support is going to help you in terms of ranking. Now, and I think it was a Wall Street Journal article that just came out a couple days ago. AMP is very, has had mixed reviews, because philosophically I'm kind of opposed to it, because I don't like the idea of having my web page and then a smaller little website or little web page with, you know, fewer ads on it that I hand over to Google. It just seems like, no, Google, I want you to send them to my site. And I actually talked to somebody at Google, and I basically told them this. I said, you know, I'm philosophically opposed. And they said, well, the thing about it is the web is not good for mobile devices. Like, most sites are so bloated and so slow and just so terrible to use that this is our way of tackling that problem. You know, and so I understand why they're doing it, but it's also a little self-serving in their regard, because, you know, now everybody is kind of still stuck within Google. And so this Wall Street Journal article that just came out this last week said that a lot of people are reporting that they're seeing revenue go down because Google is directing to the AMP page, which has fewer ads on it, which in turn is faster. So anyway, it remains to be seen what happens with AMP. So it's just something to file away in your mind.
Quick question for you. So rich snippets and this AMP feature or compatibility with Google search, that's something that the webmaster or someone charged with code for a website would actually install on the site?
Yeah. So rich snippets are in some ways easier, because they are literally bits of code that you can stick into the web page, and you pull in, you know, whatever information you need to. You know, there are plugins that do this pretty well right now. We manually did it on Simply Recipes because we wanted really, really extreme control over everything. And, you know, we were constantly tweaking every little odds and ends, and you didn't have that much control with a plugin. And so for us, it was really important to kind of do it manually. AMP is a kind of a different beast, because what you're doing is you're serving a different page. So for instance, I'll use Simply Recipes as an example. So if Simply Recipes wanted to serve up an AMP page, it would need to have a specific URL that it could tell Google that this is the AMP page. And actually what you do is let's say we talk about the banana bread recipe, right? On the banana bread recipe page, somewhere in the HTML of that document, there would need to be a line that says, here is the URL of the AMP page, right? And so then Google would see that and go, okay, now we know where to go. And they would go and now start grabbing the AMP page because you pointed it to it. But the hard thing is that you now have to create like 2 sets of pages. And you know, if you're using something like WordPress, it's not super hard to do because you can create a second, you know, template, but it's still just, you're maintaining 2 sets of pages. So I don't really like the whole thing. Google or Facebook's doing something like this as well. They're doing something called Lightning Pages, which, you know, I don't know if they're still doing it, but sometimes you'll see an article and you'll tap it and it loads instantly, but still in the Facebook Chrome, and I think they put a little icon next to it as well. So it remains to be seen what will actually become of that. But I think suffice it to say, the takeaway is, if you're using any kind of content management system like WordPress or Drupal or, you know, anything like that, there are, you know, plugins that will do the heavy lifting for you. But even implementing like rich snippets is not super hard on a site. You know, even if you're sometimes you can even just throw script in a header and say, this is my organization and this is our telephone number and this is, you know, the URL of our site, and this is, you know, so there are ways that you can get some of that information in.
We have a question, Jesse. Yeah.
Snippets. So if I'm understanding correctly, it allows users to engage directly with your content. So could a user actually purchase or register or donate or do things like that with these snippets?
Wondering about if snippets provide functionality to where people could say subscribe or donate or buy something? That are they functional like that, where you could take action?
Yeah, that's a good question. I know that they have some markup for shop, because Google has like a shop section, Google Shopping. And to be honest, I don't know the answer to that question. I know that, yeah, it hasn't been in my experience. I know Google is more and more trying to take the content that's on pages and pull them into the site. I don't know if you guys have seen this, but there's something called the knowledge graph. If you search for there are certain searches that you can perform where you'll get a card that appears at the top of your search results. Have you ever seen that before? And it'll say, like, a lot of times it'll be like a snippet from Wikipedia, right? And it'll try to answer your question right there on the Google search page. So I don't know exactly where that comes from. We've had that happen with some of our recipes, and there hasn't been any clear indication as to why they specifically pulled that in. I think it has more to do with trying to match the specific question. Like if they think that this question can be answered with this content, it's gonna. I think it has to do with the reliability of the results that they're returning. Is the answer.
Hey, Jesse, you talked about these rich snippets, but even without that, if I have any control over a web page, I can control what shows up in the Google result, right? Like the little descriptive text. I mean, that I instruct
you. Not
Google.
Exactly. You might think you could, but you kind of can. So you can pass in a meta description.
And what's that? Tell us what a meta description is.
So meta description is like, I like to say it this way, it's the elevator pitch for your web page, right? It's like your 90 word or however many characters it is, I forget, but you're making a pitch to the user to try to get them to click on your site, right? And so you want it to reflect the tone of your site. You want it to be relevant to the page that it's specifically on. What we did for all of the recipes, for instance, in our in our library, we had meta descriptions that were really great, compelling, like one sentence, like this is comfort food, or you know what I mean? Like we would say something that would get people, they would see that title, they'd see the picture maybe, and then they would see that meta description and they would click on it. Now, the reason that I said sort of is because Google does not always use that. Like they don't have to. It's not, sometimes because partly it depends on what a person is searching for, right? So if somebody says banana bread chocolate chip, and maybe our banana bread recipe is still going to be the #1 result, but now they got to think about, well, okay, what about chocolate chip? This isn't a banana bread chocolate chip recipe, but maybe like one of our top comments has this great way to like fold in chocolate chips and make it a chocolate chip, banana bread recipe. So then Google says, okay, so the comment is really where the relevant information is. So then they're going to take that and use that as that little blurb instead of using the meta description you passed along, because it's less relevant to the user. Does that make sense?
Gotcha. Now we're all non-SEO professionals here. We're PR people, marketing people.
Sure.
Just did marketers and communications folks. So we're not really probably charged with doing any of this stuff that you're talking about, but we want to know about it. We want to be part of that discussion. What else do we need to know as non-experts?
Yeah, so that's a good question. What I wanted to do was I wanted to just kind of talk about like a couple of things. The 3 most important signals, this is super relevant. The 3 most important signals, according to Google, #1 is content, and specifically site quality, which I'll mention in a moment. But content is most important. The links pointing to your site are second most important, And then the third most important thing is this thing called rank brain, which is they have this machine learning AI that's trying to figure out what is relevant to you. But so I think the important takeaway is, like, there's all these ranking signals and stuff like that. But at the end of the day, and I firmly believe this, the content that you post and the quality of the site, the quality of the content that you put out there is really important. And I can share a link, but Google specifically, expressly has a page where it says, what does quality mean to us? Like, what are we looking for when we say we want quality sites in Google? And I can go through them, and they're fairly high level, but I think they're helpful. Are they topics of genuine interest to the readers, instead of trying to, figure out what might rank well and write about that? Like, is it something that's genuinely going to be interesting to your readers? And how do they measure that? They measure that with a bounce rate, right? If somebody comes to your site and it's not interesting, then they're going to bounce away. Is the content being written by people who understand the topic well instead of shallow? Is the content original? And again, it ties into that duplicate content. Is this yours? Is this something that you're sharing? Would you trust the information on this site? I mentioned the artificial intelligence part because Google is trying more and more to emphasize accuracy as part of a signal, on this for determining quality results.
Hey, Jesse, that page that you mentioned from Google with the ranking factors, would you post that on Twitter using our course hashtag?
Absolutely, yeah.
So do you know the hashtag?
Somebody I think used it, but I don't remember it.
It's hashtag SOCMED, so SocMed UCLA.
Okay.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Not a problem. Google quality, and I'll do it now so you guys can actually look at it.
Hey, what about keywords? We're developing really great content for our website, but we want the text to be relevant without being stuffed full of keywords. How do we determine which keywords people are actually searching for?
Yeah, so there's a couple ways to do it. I mean, one of the things I think you want to be careful about is Google, because they're emphasizing quality of content, a lot of this goes back to thinking like a user. So you want to be optimizing your site for people, right? You want specifically to be thinking about, what would users be looking for or typing when they're trying to find what it is I'm trying to sell or give. Did I lose you?
Yeah, hey, we're back. We lost you.
Oh, yeah, sorry about
Sorry.
that.
So we were talking about keywords.
Right, so one of the things you have to be careful about is just you don't want to overemphasize keywords because, again, Google is emphasizing quality. And so part of this is really learning to think like a user. Like, what would a person be looking for if they were going to be satisfied with the thing that I am providing, right? This content that I'm offering. And so there are there's some practical tips around how to do that. I mean, one of the good ways to do this is Google has an AdWords keyword planner. And actually, let me just show that to you. Would it be helpful if I showed it to you?
Yeah, it'd be great. And anyone with a Google account, a Google sign-in, can access that, right?
Yeah, it's in AdWords, so you might need to. I'm trying to remember. I think you might need to set up an AdWords account first. But when you get in there, let me share this so that.
But even if you have the AdWords account, you don't need to buy any ads.
No, you don't. Right. Not for this. Okay. So what you can do is you can actually come into this, and what's great about this is you can get search volume and data.
Hey, Jesse, is there any way to make that bigger on screen?
Sure. Yeah.
Yeah, that's better. Thank you.
There we go. So you can, let's just say, let's type women's boots. Okay. And then we can say get search volume, and you can add all sorts of things into here. Now, what this is specifically for is this is for how to plan your ads. I just want to give a little bit of context. So what this tool is intended for is for people who are going to run ads and are trying to buy specific AdWords, so that if somebody's searching, for instance, for women's boots, I want to see if it makes sense for me to run an ad for that particular keyword. And so what you see here is this is an estimate, but it's a pretty rough one at that, because it's just a sample of their data. But basically, it's saying that the average monthly searches for women's boots is 100K to 1 million, which means that the competition for that particular keyword is high, okay? So from a content standpoint, what that means is that if you're gonna write about women's boots, right? If your web page is about women's boots, well, you might wanna get more specific in what you're talking about. You may wanna drill down a little bit and instead say, all right, well, let's talk about galoshes, right? Or whatever your specific thing is. And then when you add that,
They maybe misspelled galoshes.
oh, did I?
I don't know. We're from California, man. We have no idea. Galoshes.
All right, let's do fashion boots. I shouldn't have used this example because this is way out of my forte. Okay, 10 to 100. So the competition for that is much lower. All right. So again, it gives you some ideas. The other thing is if you want to be more proactive, like you're saying, well, what if I use this word, or what if I use this word, and it's driven by what you know about your particular content, right? So if you know the words, like Elise was constantly, she's like, oh, it could be a scone, but it also could be called this or that, or some people say slow cooker, or it could be crock pot. So sometimes she would be thinking about like which makes the most sense to use, and so this is one of the ways that you can look into figuring out which of these words is less competitive, which might I have more of an opportunity to find a niche in, because I think that's ultimately what we'd be looking for.
It's kind of a double-edged sword, though, right? Because if it's popular, that means people are searching for it. But if too many people are searching for it, that means that you're going to have a hard time competing for it.
Right.
If you go with something that's less popular, it's sort of a circular thing.
I am more of the, and this is again one of the reasons why I'm only showing this to you to give you some ideas. I never usually do this. I find more help from a thesaurus, frankly, because if you can find different ways to say what you think your users would be saying, I think that can be helpful. The other way to do this is you can search for new keywords. So you can say, all right, well, I sell women's boots, right? And then there's categories that you can look up, and they break them all down, and they can give you some example of those keywords as well. So there's two different ways I think that you can approach this, right? You can do the more proactive, where you're looking specifically for, like I don't even know what else people would look for when they look for women's boots, or which I think would be more likely is that you kind of already know that there are all these other things out here, and which one of those things do you want to kind of get the niche on?
Gotcha. Hey, we have about 10 minutes left. What else do you think? Either things that we should know as non-SEO experts, or things that we should know to avoid? Yeah.
Well, I would say that a couple of things. And this is, I think this is a high enough level thing that, no matter what you do, this is really important. Going back to this idea of thinking like a user, get users right to the content that they search for. So put the relevant content up high, make sure your keywords appear high, even just visually speaking, like make sure that it's the most prominent thing, because when a person comes to your site, if they see the content that they thought they were that they were hoping to get when they clicked on the result, they're more likely to stick around, which Google loves those signals, and you're gonna end up ranking higher because of that. And so just thinking about users, and I would even say that it's important to keep in mind focus. Focus is really, really important, and sometimes we tend to tackle too much in our content. Like you'll have a page that has that's trying to do 3 or 4 different things when those probably should be 3 or 4 different pages. And I think Google ends up rewarding that a little bit more. There's a couple of other things, make sure that Google can crawl your site. I mentioned the XML sitemaps. Make sure that Google can see your content the way that users can. So rich snippets are important. You have to be careful with, now there's some more technical things. I'll skip over those, but, and then the other thing, and probably this is where we can end before questions, and that is, make sure that you're not relying on Google too much, because we ran into that. A huge percentage of our traffic came through Google. And when Google changed their algorithm and said, you know what, older sites aren't quite as important, and turned that signal down, suddenly we lost a lot of traffic. And so it's really important that you're not putting all your eggs, for your investment portfolio. You don't put all of your, money in one thing. You diversify. And so it's important that Google is a part of this, but also social is really important, like building up your Pinterest and whatever social media channels make the most sense for whatever industry that you're looking at. And then also we found that like email newsletters, it's funny, people thought email was going to be dead after social media took off, but email newsletters are even more important than ever, because you have greater control of who sees your content. Because for a long time it was like, oh, you build up your social profile, but then Facebook and Instagram come along and they said, you know what, we're going to do algorithms and show users what we think they want to see. And so then now pages get like way, so much fewer impressions. And so, going back to emails, newsletters, they just make so much more sense. So, I think there are a lot of tools that you can look at. I mean, Google has tons of great documentation. You guys might have already talked about this, but Moz has a ton of great tools. There's like the Open Site Explorer that will show you the overall like ranking and weight of a page. There's some great conferences even out there that I would suggest if you really want to get serious about SEO. SMX, MozCon. They go super deep into all of this stuff. And so there's a lot of great things out there, a lot of great resources. Hopefully that, get you on the right track.
How much do guys like you cost if we're with an organization or a company that wants to improve its search?
So I don't usually like market myself for SEO, but I can tell you, I'll just tell you, like, we hired a guy that came in and did an SEO audit, and I think it was about $750 for the audit. And then we had somebody, actually Key Lime Metrics, that came in, and that was more in the thousands of dollars. And basically what we ended up getting was something like, 20, 30, 40 page document that essentially went through all of these signals and, and identified where there were issues and there were problems and that sort of thing. And, I think there's definitely, money to be made in something like that. I believe, I kind of feel more like developers should be doing this, but there's a place for, I think a lot of what SEO people do nowadays is really more about education. they'll take something like I just gave to you, and they'll do that in a document, but they'll take your specific site and they'll outline these things, and then you kind of have to hire a developer to to go in and fix these things. But that's typically how it would work, you know.
Okay, very good. We have a few minutes. Any?
Do you want to take questions? I'd love to.
Yeah. We got a couple. Either one of you guys.
Okay, so
yeah.
in most recent articles, you read a lot of things that say like organic search is dying and everybody is concentrating more on paid. So how valuable is doing now SEO about organic search?
The question is, we talk a lot in this class about organic versus paid. Mm-hmm. Usually as it pertains to platforms like Facebook, where for brand pages, organic is slight now, and then you got to pay. How does that apply to search? We looked at a Google page earlier, and we looked at the paid ads at the top, and we looked at the organic results down below. What makes sense now? What's a good mix? Should you focus more on paid?
That's a good question. I'm more of the persuasion. I think if you're selling a product, paid still makes sense. If you're selling a service, maybe paid makes sense. Obviously, it depends on your marketing strategy, but I feel like for services, you get more bang for your buck when you're kind of explaining to people the service that you do, and you're convincing them through your site, so your traffic is going to come in through those blog posts and articles. And again, I know a lot of small businesses that start a blog because that's the thing to do, but the content is meaningless and just a waste of space. And I don't think that does anything, because nobody's going to share it. Nobody's going to get excited about it. Nobody's going to go, wow, that's really interesting. So organic makes sense if it's legitimate.
What kind of mix? If we're doing search engine optimization and search engine marketing, typically do we focus like 70% of our time on SEO and 30% on paid stuff, or 60-40 or 80-20, or what do most people do?
I think it depends on the industry that you're in. I think if you're selling products, so I'll tell you, I sell, my wife and I have a business, and we make candles, and we sell candles. I would never advertise on Google at all, because I never click on Google ads. But I've gotten a lot of traction actually on Facebook ads, and then also in Instagram ads, believe it or not. I just have gotten a lot of traction there. So if you're talking products, I would definitely put a lot, I probably put a decent amount in paid. But then again, I'm more of like, my philosophy is like, look for ways that people are engaging with your product, and then look for ways to amplify that, And so I often find that happens more organically, because again, if you're scrolling down through and you see sponsored, usually, I don't know about you guys, but like most of the time that's not performing really well. Sometimes it does, but not that often. And so if you can find ways to do that more organically, most of the businesses that I'm working with are killing it with a great product, and then capitalizing on the word of mouth that they've got. So
okay, wait a question. All the way in the back, way back.
Yeah, so I remember way back when, in the early 2000s, when I started like experimenting with web design and HTML. We used to put like the same keyword in the back end, in the HTML, and we would just repeat it a million times, and we would just like put it in the white space, and so we do all of these like tricks that I don't think Google accepts anymore. So are there any like rules of thumb or like guidelines that Google is using right now in terms of how many keywords you can use, or how often, how often you can kind of repeat it within the same page? Did
you hear that, Jesse?
I did, yeah. So Google has gotten really, really good at figuring out keyword stuffing. I don't know specifically what their rules are around how much is too much. But I think so basically, I mentioned before this brain, the rank brain, this machine learning AI that Google has. I want to just tell you quickly how it works, because I think it'll maybe answer this question in a roundabout way. So basically what they did was, it's not the algorithm, it's this thing, it's this machine, like Watson basically, that will see a list of results, and it will pick which one it thinks Google will put, the Google algorithm will put at number one. And so what they did was they did a test where they put it up against humans, and they said, here's a list of links for this particular search result, which you think will be number one. And this artificial intelligence machine learning rank brain that they created beat humans 80 to 70. So it has almost a better sense of what is relevant than humans even do. And so, and they're using this to serve up probably up to 15% of their traffic right now. And so you may not actually be getting the Google algorithm. You may be getting this artificial intelligence that's making better assumptions and trying to serve those things up. So I say all of that to simply say they are getting pretty savvy about figuring out ways that is done in a spammy way. And so I think, generally speaking, if it's in your header and if it's in your content, again, depending on the length, because there's ratio of length to keyword as well. Common sense generally applies here. I wouldn't use it, more than 3, 4, 5 times. And I've even seen some indication where if you are saying things like, this cicada wasp trap that traps cicada wasps is, you know what I mean? Like if you have even just too many occurring in a natural paragraph, I've noticed some issues where a site taking a hit because of that. So I think the general rule of thumb is like, try to make it relevant to your users.
Okay. We didn't even get to talking about the black hat stuff, so we're letting you off the hook on that. Do we have any other questions? Because we're actually a little over time. No, I think we're good. So listen. So yeah, we'll let you off the hook with the black hat stuff. But Jesse, thank you so much for your time and your expertise, your insights. We really appreciate it. We have a couple of students who are going to be writing about your discussion tonight, turning those into a blog post, hopefully search optimized blog post. Yeah.
What I can do too, Eric, I can email you my notes from the talk, and I don't know if you have a good place to post them, but then
we do.
Okay,
yeah,
great.
No,
and then
each week we have a reading list, and it could be a blog post, it could be an infographic, it could be anything. If you have those notes, even if they're just in a Google Doc, we can post those as well.
Sure. Yeah. Fantastic.
Okay, terrific. Well, thank you, Jesse. Let's hear it for Jesse.
Guys, thanks so much. Appreciate it.
All right, now it's